MCCTV is largely about what happens in the classrooms of Metropolitan Community College. Our mission, of course, is to inform you about the educational opportunities the college provides. But we also chat with speakers, authors, and performers who visit our campuses. And once per quarter, we sit down with the president and CEO of the Greater Omaha Chamber of Commerce for a chat about the cultural, social, and economic health and development of our viewing area. In the conversation ahead, we'll recap what happened in the calendar year of 2019 and look ahead to this year as well. I'm your host, Kent Pavelka. David Brown joins us next on MCC TV. David, welcome back.
So which am I, speaker, author, or performer? I wonder which of those things I am that you guys have on this show.
Yes.
It's good to see you again.
Good
Thanks
to
for having
see
me
you
on
too,
board.
man. 2019. I know we're going to get into some of the minutia here in more detail, certainly. But if just off the top of your head, if someone said, "What's the biggest and best thing that happened in 2019?"
Biggest and best. Wow, there were some remarkable biggest and best, I think. I mean, probably the largest brand name in the world said yes to Omaha in the Omaha region with the Google data center announcement and the construction of that starting. So we added to the panoply of international brands that are building remarkable facilities here, either on the data center side or even the ones that are building on all the other types of businesses that have been here for decades and those that are continuing to kind of add to their size here. So that was a big one. We did $1 billion in economic development projects last year. So and Google was a big part of that. So that's always a nice one to be able to start off with is, a nice $600 million facility from Google that should continue growing over time.
What was the biggest one ever? Single project.
I think it was probably the Facebook project. Probably they announced $1 billion, I think. And so that might be the biggest one we've ever announced all at one time. But the real interesting challenge is how many times will they do that iteration, right? So they're going to build now, then fill it with equipment, and then build phase 2 and fill it with equipment, and how long will that be going on? I mean, they've been building, Google as an example has been building in Council Bluffs now for 7-8 years, something like that, and looks like it maybe even 10, and they'll keep building there for another half a decade, and then they'll be building here too. So how long does this investment just continue? So these are the gifts that keep on giving.
Do you have any notion of the answer to that question? Or?
Well, I think we all have. You look at what they've done in other cities, given the size of the ground they purchased there and the size of the ground they purchased here. And, some of these are going to be decade-long or more construction projects, where as long as the world changes, stays pretty much the same, and they continue to have need for data storage and the cloud continues to be important, I think we're going to see more and more of that stuff here, and we're a great spot for it. So I think we're going to see long-term growth from those companies.
Sorry, go ahead.
I think the other big one would have been LinkedIn, and then that's a very different kind of project, a great brand name that everybody knows. But they're more than doubling their size here in Omaha. There'll be 1,000 people when they get their new building built out of Sterling Ridge. And what that means is that this is going to be either their second or third largest concentration of employees in the country. And while that's nice and fun and they're great jobs and all that kind of good stuff, the part that excites me the most is that LinkedIn says, we're doing all these great things in these other communities where we have significant investments. We want to do that here in Omaha too. So let's figure out how Omaha can be one of those centers of excellence for people using LinkedIn as a way to sell more stuff or build their networks or find employees or find new positions. Let's help the community figure out a way that they can utilize our services even better and in partnership, because we're going to be such a huge presence here. That's a lot of fun.
You bet. Why am I thinking, is there a local connection with LinkedIn originally, or what was the?
Well, I think LinkedIn, a lot of the tech companies that are here had some start originally with PayPal.
Okay.
When PayPal first did their location and they started building, a lot of the tech companies that are here, folks went back to California, got new positions. They had to expand somewhere. They said, boy, Omaha was a great experience for us. And so I'm sure somehow some line that we draw in a lot of the different tech companies that have opened facilities from California have some residents from their time at PayPal.
The general economy perform as expected in
Yeah, I think
2019?
trade was a challenge for us still. We saw transportation was impacted by trade, particularly on the commodity side of things. So we saw Werner, we saw UP, we saw other trucking and rail companies across the country impacted by it, which means that ag companies here in the community were impacted by it. So think any of those companies that are buying and selling commodities, having a huge part of the international market cut off because of the trade war that was going on, that impacted a large number of our companies here, and you could see it in some of their bottom lines. So, and I think the flood last year it was not only a huge headline, but it had a huge impact on agriculture, including the sale of equipment, the sale of silos, any kind of farm equipment you can think of. I mean, all of that was stopped dead in its tracks in Nebraska and Iowa, but primarily Nebraska. So I think those were all impactful on the economy, but the economy continued to grow, which is pretty interesting.
So, notwithstanding all the issues the flood created, the net result was all positive, or?
Well, I wouldn't say it's all positive because we're still feeling the remnants of the flood. I mean, when the first freeze happened, there was still water in the fields from the last season, and now it's sitting there frozen. And so, depending upon what happens this spring with runoff from northern snow, what kind of rain we get in the spring, do we accommodate the ability for those fields to all drain so they can get back and be planted again? That's still a serious concern. We cover 7 counties now in our region, and the vast majority of them are still being impacted by what could happen in the spring. So I wouldn't say that it was a total net positive. The economy did grow, so GDP growth was still there. Population still grew. Sectors of our economy that could continue to thrive did. We have that. We've talked about that before. We've got this interesting counterbalancing economy where when some are strong, others might not be so strong, and so we end up having a really nice, diverse economy. So I think we benefited from that this year. Would I have preferred that we didn't have the flood and didn't have the trade challenge, because then our GDP would have just taken off and growth would have happened? Absolutely. But can't control that. So I think we responded really well, and the market responded well too.
I was just going to ask you, had it not been for the flood and the trade war, would 2019 have been, without question, the best year ever for Omaha?
Well, it certainly would have been a banner year. I don't think there's any doubt about that. We saw even our economic development load shrink substantially once the spring hit and people saw flooding. I mean, we've talked about us being in the business of acquiring sites and developing sites in advance of development. Well, several of those sites that we had optioned and put in place were underwater. So there was no selling those last year.
Right.
And the number of companies that looked for projects in those areas just kind of put them on hold. So I think it would have been a much bigger year economically had we not had some of the weather challenges that we had in the trade wars.
The numbers, specific numbers, let's go through projects, capital investment.
Sure. So we landed 36 projects last year. I mean, we try and set an average goal of about 60 projects a year. And some years we get 40, some years we get 80. So the 36 doesn't trouble me much. Our backlog is really where you start paying attention to how many projects you've got. I think we opened 166 new files last year. And of that, about 75% were new companies that were looking at the market. So investment from the outside. And that backlog is a good level of backlog, meaning that we can land a good number of those in this coming year. So that was a good backlog year for us. I mentioned we did a little more than $1 billion in capital investment last year. And that's about 2,300 jobs and some change. About 1,700 of those were new, and a good percentage of those were paying above the median wage for the region. 60% of those, I think. And so it was a good year from hitting our numbers perspective. I think we've got a really good opportunity to do something pretty impressive this next year. We had 72 prospect visits last year. And if you're getting a visit, you're down into the top 3. Most of those happened in the fourth quarter. So I mean, we had a really robust fourth quarter of getting people in here to see us. So I think that bodes well for what's going to happen in the first few quarters this year.
So what do you do to close the sale for those that are on the precipice of making a decision?
That's a really good question. So it usually comes down to Remember, this we call it site selection, but it's really site elimination from the company's perspective. How can they get communities and sites off the list so they can get to a decision in some way or another? So a lot of our process is just how do we stay on the list? And the first way to do that is, do you have the buildings that they need? Do you have the ground that they need? And so we've been fortunate that we've been able to meet the building and ground needs of our companies of late. We're starting to see a little more spec development. So there's about 250,000 square feet of manufacturing, light manufacturing, speculative space that was built last year. They're planning to build another 250,000 square feet this year. So we've got places to show folks, multi-tenant space. Office vacancy has been kind of low. And so when something does become available, it gets gobbled up pretty quickly. And we're not doing a lot of spec office development here, so we're having to kind of build projects for clients. And that takes a special kind of client too. So we're constantly trying to cobble together office space for large clients. But there's some, I mean, Capital District, there's a 40,000 square foot office tenant that is, or office facility that Shamrock is building there right on Capitol. And that's in play. If people are building office buildings, they're typically building more square footage than they need, so there's office space there in play. So it isn't like there's nothing out there, but it certainly is tight. I mentioned land is a bit tight, but we've also been able to buying pieces of property that people want. So I think that's the first thing. We got to make sure we got ground and/or buildings for people. Then we got to prove that the talent is here. And so we're constantly going through the process of showing what the talent pipeline looks like for specific kinds of jobs that company might be asking for, what the wages are for those positions, and then they compare that information against the other places they're considering. So first is, have you got a place for us to lay our heads, so to speak? And then secondly, can I find the people that I need? And once they get through that process, then it comes down to numbers. It comes down to incentives, it comes down to price, it comes down to wages. So once they get the two big ones out of the way, location and people, then they really start talking about where can I do this most economically.
To what degree do a lot of these companies, when they get to that stage, throw the caveats of, well, the other contenders are giving us this, the other contenders are giving us that?
It happens every time. And so, I mean, I just wrote an article that we posted out there that said, look, economic development is, every single project that we have is competitive. Whether it's a local company expanding or a new company coming to town, they all have choices. And every state in the union is offering incentives, and every state in the union is offering great talent, and every state in the union is offering great buildings and ground. And so these are all competitive. So it always gets to the conversation of, if I'm considering Omaha and Nebraska, or any community that we cover in the region in Nebraska, and we're competing with 3 other cities, it doesn't take long at all for the conversation to go towards what those other cities have in terms of incentives or wages or whatever, and how can we be competitive with that.
Do you find often that, or at least in some cases, you're being used with really no intention of
we kind of sniff that out pretty well. I mean, we pretty much know from how clients are working with us if we're just being a lost leader or not. So are we just trying to convince the state where they are now, to give more? It doesn't happen very much anymore. Companies really don't have, in many cases, the time or energy to play that kind of a game because they're busy trying to get the project done. So, but we've had it happen over the years, but we can pretty much smell that when it's happening. So we're not surprised when those projects stay where they started.
The willingness to relocate is less of an impediment than years ago, if everything makes sense. No, just a company.
Yeah, relocation almost never happens. Expansion is where we get virtually all of our market. The Boeing move from Washington to Chicago, or the ConAgra moving their stuff from here to Chicago. That is so rare. And it's not something that you typically pitch a company on. It'll be a decision the company has made. We're going to do this for whatever reason, and then they knock on the door of the community that they've decided they want to be at, and they figure that deal out. I mean, it is less than 1% easily of the deals of something relocating from point A to point B. It is almost always, and it's much healthier this way, an expansion into your market. So that's why we're here now. We weren't here 2 years ago because we weren't in this market 2 years ago. Now we got to serve this market more aggressively.
You went through a laundry list of things that you've got to be able to provide. But if you had a magic wand and could do one thing, probably dramatically, to open the floodgates, what would that be?
You know, it'd be around people. If I could show that we had a much stronger pipeline of people coming out of our high schools, colleges, and universities in larger numbers in the kinds of careers that the companies need, that would make us king of the hill, because every community in the country is dealing with the talent piece. And I don't care if everybody has 2.5% unemployment. Let's just assume that as a given. If you're in a larger market, there's more warm bodies when you have 2.5% unemployment than there are in a market like us, and so that puts us at a disadvantage.
There's no answer to that really, in terms of expediting the
there is
numbers.
There is actually, I think it's in our own benefit and in our own hands to be able to say, look, we can develop our own talent more intentionally around the kinds of jobs and careers that are here, so that students have a clear understanding of what kind of a career they can have here and what kind of company they can work for, and develop relationships with those companies so that it isn't sort of a, now what do I do now when I get out of school? We can do a much better job of making sure the community has the amenities that these workers want, the talent want here, and so we're not competing against somebody that's got, this is never one of the issues, but more coffee shops or more dog parks, or stuff that is relatively innocuous, but is important in a person's lifestyle. So we got to be able to have talent that meets the demand, and we have to be able to have a community that meets the demands of that talent. So if I could wave the magic wand, I'd say, poof, we have another 10 or 15 or 20,000 people into the mix that are targeted at tech jobs that are out there, or at financial services jobs that are out there, because our companies are really hurting not being able to find those people.
Yeah, the reason I threw that out there is that Metropolitan Community College does a lot of partnerships with industry and answers those immediate concerns and needs.
And we work with Metro all the time. I'm working with them on a couple of clients right now where we literally are face to face saying, show me what the pipeline looks like for folks with these specific kinds of skill sets. How can Metro help with that? And the response is almost always, let's do a partnership with the company.
Right.
Let's be really close with them so we understand what we can do for each other. So, Metro is a major player in that space. Now, if I had a second wand, I think we need to do something about taxes in the state. And it isn't just property taxes, although nobody likes those. It's also income taxes, which I've talked to you about before, and how we deal with sales tax has gotten unbalanced. It's like that irritating table in the diner when you lean on the table and it goes.
Is it becoming more wobbly, or?
I think it is more wobbly. I think so. I think we basically don't tax a good percentage of the things that we could, which means that we're putting more dependency upon income tax, corporate income tax, and property tax to pay the bill. And it was originally intended that those things would be kind of a third, and it has gotten out of whack. And so we've got to go back and do some reform to get that back in place. But in doing so, we can reduce taxes, I think.
But the attempt to do that has been there for a long time.
It has.
You see any light at the end of the tunnel in that respect?
I think we've had a couple of initiatives in the last few years that will help that cause. The first is that Nebraska Blueprint identified really clearly that we need to do something to be more competitive from a tax perspective, and that broadly from the state level, the business community and elected officials understand that we got to do something about tax reform. Our challenge is trying to figure out a way not to piecemeal it. So this year, property tax reform is the big deal, right? And so there's going to be some solution, I don't know what it is, but some solution to property tax reform in 2020. So that leaves sales taxes and income taxes out there to be dealt with. I think we need to kind of look at all of them again and try to figure out what the revenue needs are, and figure out the most effective way to do that, and then make whatever adjustments we need to make that happen. And I think that can happen in 21 and 22.
Very good.
I think it can.
You look back, the annual meeting,
It was great.
pushing
Daniel
it
Cole.
to almost 900 attendees.
Yeah, and it was a very, it's always well done. Our event team does a remarkable job putting on events. But Daniel Coyle was a great speaker. He talked about culture in your companies and what it takes to attract and keep talent. So that was terrific.
What was the nugget there? What does it take?
Well,
I mean,
he actually
obviously
said
we've
there
been
were-
talking about that.
It actually comes down to the leader, and the leader showing that they are that they can engage with the workforce in ways that the workforce finds valuable. So it's going to sound really strange, but there really does have to be a relationship between the person that's leading people and the people they are leading. They've got to develop trust. They've got to understand that there's some vulnerability there, I think, in that leader, that no leaders perceive themselves as perfect or are perfect, and that this is a team effort to make things happen. So there were some really interesting ways that they showed how do you focus on people when they're actually sitting in front of you. Just natural things that you would do that would make your employees feel more like they're part of a team, and that they're wanted and their input is important. So interesting stuff.
You want to go on to Economic Outlook Luncheon, the membership open house.
Yeah,
All these
so-
were highlights.
Yeah, they were. Economic Outlook Luncheons is always interesting because we not only measure what our local companies have said. 92% of them think that their companies are growing at a rate that's the same or faster than the U.S. economy. Those are big numbers, and we had a really interesting speaker from the Brookings Institute who talked about labor and talent and the importance of that in growing the economy. So that was a timely issue that our members found valuable. And then, of course, the annual open house is just a great networking opportunity. We had a record crowd this year. I swear we had more than 1,000 people in that space. I don't think we're supposed to have that many people in that space. But, we have 50 vendors show up and provide food and drink for our members. And our members come and celebrate the ending of one year and the beginning of another one. So it's a great networking opportunity for us.
We touched on the legislature in a more general sense, just public policy developments. There are a couple of bills, LB 270 and 627.
Yeah, so 720 is really important for us because it's the new
720,
incentive bill.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's the new incentive bill. And I think we've talked before that Nebraska Advantage was passed 10 years or so ago, and it expires at the end of 20, and we need to replace it with another bill. And so 720 is that replacement bill.
But there's a website about this, right? Goodfornebraska.org.
Yeah, so we realized that we needed to tell our own story better. And so we had a news conference with all of our partners in the late fall, and said, you know what, LB 720 is so important to the state that we need to make sure that the businesses around the state understand what's at risk if we don't get this passed. And then we hope that they will then talk to the senators about the importance of getting it passed. Last year we fell 3 votes short in getting it passed a year in advance. That was mostly because the property tax bill also didn't make it through the legislature, and the two of them were sort of tied together, unfortunately. So this year we've got a much more aggressive effort, a lot more data. We're responding to kind of false news out there when people say incentives aren't worth the money. We say, yeah, actually they are. In the last 7 years, they've returned a 24% return to the state. I don't know about you, but I'd love to have a 24% return on my investments. And so when the state put $400 million in and they get $520-some million out of it, that's in tax generated. That's a nice return on their investment.
So goodfornebraska.org, there's information on that website right now that people could look at and then take to their state senator.
Absolutely, they can go there, and all the 10 top talking points and all the data behind it is there. And I'd encourage people to go there and talk to their senators about the reason that they should be engaging there. LB 627 is a bill that we've been working on. It was LB 586, as I recall, a couple of years ago. But this is basically an anti-discrimination bill for employment of folks in the LGBTQ plus community. For us, it's a talent issue. It's a quality of life issue. It's a place issue. And so we've been trying to encourage the state senators to pass a bill that would prohibit discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. So it'll pass eventually. Hopefully it'll be this year, but if not this year, I'm sure the group will continue working on it over the next couple of years.
Help me with the notes I have here. 2019 people and 2019 place.
Yeah, so our agenda is broken into people, place, and business growth. Okay, and so When we talk about people, it's that whole talent discussion I
Right.
talked about before: development, retention, attraction of new people, and diversity and inclusion. So those are the four primary components. And so we had a code conference last fall, which is our diversity and inclusion conference, 460 so attendees, sold out conference, and we'll do it again. I mean, it was well received, and we're basically trying to show companies how to be more diverse in their hiring practices, and then how to create a more inclusive culture. That's where we do Leadership Omaha and all of our leadership training through the Mindset program, and we even have some podcast stuff that we do where a couple thousand people participate as listening to the podcast that we put out. We do about 3 or 4 key kind of thought leader podcasts every year, and then there's a library on our website that you can get to hear those.
Good.
And then place is interesting, and I just noticed that we left something off of place, but we added Otoe County to the partnership last year. And by doing that, 44% of the population of the state of Nebraska is now covered by our economic development partnership.
That'd be the Nebraska City
Yeah,
area?
Nebraska City area. So we go all the way from Nebraska City to Fremont, and from Blair all the way out to Cass County.
That's
and
Greater Omaha now.
It is Greater Omaha. It is. And so 44% of the population of the state we represent, which I
Great.
think is saying a lot for what we do. We also launched Connect Go, which is a transportation planning initiative that looks at moving people around the region more efficiently and effectively, which will be a mass transit discussion in addition to more effective roads, and even the announcement yesterday that the NDOT has identified $800 million worth of road improvements over the next 25 years for the Omaha metro area, particularly
Right.
on the interstates. That's a big deal. The mayor's announcement that we want to do street maintenance bonds, the chamber supports that, and it'll be helping to get those bonds passed in the May election. So that's a lot of money that's being put out there on roads that needs to be done. And we didn't talk about the urban core, but basically we're still working on trying to figure out what it takes to develop that space really from the river to Saddle Creek Road between Cumming and Leavenworth. That's kind of our urban core, and we think it can be more densely developed. And so we've got a group called the Urban Core Committee that has asked for a housing study, a retail study, a governance study, a transportation study, a parking study, and some site development studies, and all of those are in process right now. So we should be able to have a reimagined plan, if you will, for that urban core come the end of 2020.
Very good.
So lots of stuff going on.
There's never a show that we do without adding to the list of rankings that Omaha gets into here.
Gotta love the rankings.
Fastest growing tech hotspot.
Gotta love that. And they've been looking at. We actually are talking about the Lincoln Omaha kind of region as a tech hotspot. You love being number one on any of them. If any of them are talent or tech related, you really start feeling even better about yourself. So I think there were 3 rankings that basically talked about as being a place for tech talent,
Right.
or for tech growth. So
Hotspot, tech boomtown, fastest growing city for U.S. tech professionals.
yeah, and so you really look at these things that they compare. They all compare something different, right? But in the end, it comes down to affordability. It comes down to quality of life. It comes down to low unemployment rate, and so kind of a predictability for jobs. And quality of life is always a big one in those. So we're really pleased when we get more and more of those.
And then a peek ahead, you got the Young Professionals Summit coming up early this year, Business Hall of Fame Gala in April, Excellence Awards in May.
There's never a lack of events. I think we do 9 major events a year, and so there's always another one coming down the pike. I think if I were to think about what 2020 would be indicative of, people should be paying attention to the legislature, because there's some really important stuff happening there this year in both property tax and incentives. Those 2 things have to pass.
And if someone wants to get behind what the chamber feels is most important in terms of bettering everybody's situation, what would you suggest?
Well, I think they can go to our website, omahachamber.org, and they can go to our public policy arm, and they can see all of the different things that we're engaged in right now. It's a really good way to get information about where we're spending our time and energy.
Okay. Any final thoughts?
I'm looking forward to seeing 2020 get off the ground here. I know it's already in the middle of the first quarter, but we got a lot of work to do. So away we go.
Great job, man.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Thanks much. And thank you for being with us again on MCCTV. Our goal is to better acquaint you with the mission, the leadership, and the reach of the college. I'm Kent Pavelka for Metropolitan Community College.